Good morning, friends. Happy Easter. This is Tom Cash, and we're going to do Poli-tick-in with Tom and put this on YouTube and Facebook and share this. So today we're going to do a little bit of tidbits and trivia and kind of give you a historical perspective about the history since I want to go back to 1956 because we've got a lot of stuff politically from the 50s all the way up to current day. So I just have on the display table and we'll scroll through these a little bit as we go. But let me start in 1956, and I'm going to do each year, every 4 years, and share with you the importance of understanding the popular vote, the electoral college, and what it all means. And over history, it's very interesting to see what's happened. So in 1956, you had Eisenhower and Richard Nixon on the Republican side versus Adlai Stevenson and Estes Kefauver. The result of that was Eisenhower won with 457 electoral votes and versus 73 electoral votes for Stevenson. The popular vote was about 35 million people to 26 million on the Democrats, so it was a 57% to 42% popular vote win for Eisenhower. Moving on to 1960 then, Nixon, since he was former vice president, decided to run, and he had as his vice presidential running mate for the Republicans with Henry Cabot Lodge. And of course you had President Kennedy running against Nixon, and LBJ was his running mate for vice president. It was a fairly close race from an electoral college standpoint. JFK won 303 to 219. Popular vote was very, very close. It's unusual. I don't know how many people realize this. JFK had 34,221,000 popular votes. Nixon had 34,108,000. So it was a very narrow margin on the popular vote, but it all comes down to that electoral college. So 303 to 219, and I felt that was really an interesting kind of artifact to share with you guys. Then moving on to 64, due to the Kennedy assassination, you had LBJ take over as president, and he ran with his running mate Hubert Humphrey. And so it was LBJ Humphrey ticket versus Barry Goldwater, and William Miller was the vice presidential running mate with Goldwater. They got slaughtered. LBJ had become popular, and they had 486 electoral votes to 52 votes on Goldwater's side. So they had 43 million for LBJ, 27 million for Goldwater. Moving on to 68, Nixon decided to get back into the swing of things, and he ran with Spiro Agnew, 1968, against Hubert Humphrey, and Edwin Muskie was his vice president. Nixon won that election, 301 electoral college votes to 191. And the interesting thing about that year in 68 was Governor George Wallace from Alabama got into the race, and he was kind of played the spoiler as he took about 10 million votes as an independent and kind of was the spoiler there. So I feel like looking historically, he probably took a lot from Humphrey as Nixon won that race in 68. Going on to 1972, Nixon and Agnew ran again as incumbents, and they were opposed by McGovern, and originally it was Thomas Eagleton, but Eagleton dropped out as the vice president, and Sergeant Shriver stepped in because Eagleton was having some issues with depression. So Nixon ended up winning handily 502 electoral votes to 17 on the Democrat side with McGovern, and it was one of the biggest landslides the Republicans had ever seen, with about 47 million voters. However, the problem was, as everyone knows, Watergate came up, and then you had Gerald Ford take over as both Agnew and Nixon resigned, and Gerald Ford took over as president. Then in 1976, Ford ran for president with Bob Dole as his running mate, and that's when they ran against Mr. Jimmy Carter. So, Jimmy Carter entered with Walter Mondale as his running mate. It was a very close race. Electoral college was that Carter won with 297 versus 240 for Gerald Ford and Bob Dole, and there was only about 1 million popular vote difference for Carter. Gerald Ford won 27 of the states across the country. However, they were the wrong states because he didn't win the electoral college votes in those enough of the big states like Florida, Pennsylvania, etc. He had to win the big states with the electoral votes, as we all know. Moving to 1980, you then had the start of the Reagan campaign, and Reagan and George H.W. Bush ran against Jimmy Carter and Walter Mondale, and it was an absolute slaughter. Reagan got 489 electoral votes. Carter got only 49, and it was a difference of about 10 million in the popular vote. There was also some independents. John Anderson kind of was a spoiler a little bit as an independent, and also Senator Ted Kennedy ran as in the primaries, but Carter edged him out, so he kept trying to move in the Democrat Party. Moving on to 84, Reagan ran again against Walter Mondale, and the first ever female to enter the race with Geraldine Ferraro. Reagan Bush won again, one of the biggest margins ever for a presidential race with 525 votes for the Electoral College versus 13. Interesting thing too, the Reverend Jesse Jackson with the Rainbow Coalition that was his first year to enter politics really and be a candidate and have an effect on the outcome. But I don't think that Reagan was so popular that I doubt that that would have made much of a difference. Moving on to 88, George H.W. Bush ran for president with Vice President Dan Quayle. They ran against Dukakis and Lloyd Bernstein. And this is most interesting in the vice presidential debates. There was a debate with Bernstein versus Quayle, and Quayle made a comment about linking him to JFK. Bernstein replied and said, JFK was a friend of mine and you're no JFK. So that was the big headline from the vice presidential debate during the 88 election between Quayle and Bernstein. And as we know, George H.W. Bush won 426 to 40 in the Electoral College. So Bush won handily in his first election. Then in 92, Bush and Quayle ran again for re-election as an incumbent. They got slaughtered by Bill Clinton. That was his first year to run with Clinton Gore. Clinton got 370 electoral votes versus 168. One of the fatal mistakes that H.W. Bush made was he did the famous quote, "read my lips" about taxes, and that came back to haunt him as they ended up raising taxes. Moving on to 1996, Clinton and Gore ran again. This time it was Bob Dole decided to come out of being a senator from Kansas and ran, but Clinton was highly popular still and won the race 379 to 159. Ross Perot made his first entrance there as independent and actually captured about 8% of the total popular vote. Then moving on to 2000, you had George W. Bush with Dick Cheney, and they ran against Al Gore and Lieberman. It was a highly contested race, as everyone remembers, where you had a recount of the Florida ballots, and it came down literally to the state of Florida determining that election. And as we all know, we all have the memories of hanging chads and counting the punches and the voting cards and how that went on. So this was literally, Gore had 266 electoral votes versus 271 for George W. Bush. However, Gore just edged him out with a few popular votes, but that's not what counts. You have to win the Electoral College. Then moving on to 2004, George W. Bush ran again, this time against John Kerry, and Bush won a second term with a fairly close margin on the electoral votes, 286 to 251, but Bush won. Then moving on to 2008, that was the first year for Obama. Obama won with his running mate Joe Biden, and Senator John McCain posed the first female for the Republican side, and Sarah Palin, and they got spanked pretty bad by Obama, 365 to 173. Then moving on to 2012, Obama ran again against Mitt Romney, and it was a similar result where Obama had 332 to 206. And then finally, in our 2016 election was the Trump-Pence ticket versus Hillary Clinton and Tim Kaine. Trump won 304 to 227 in the electoral votes. Interesting thing again there, as you all know, Hillary won by about 2 million popular votes across the country. However, again, going back, this is today's lesson, is you got to win the Electoral College, and until they change that's the system that we're under. So hopefully that made some sense to everyone. I'm going to focus in with some future videos. I'm going to put all of these on a YouTube channel on YouTube. It'll be called Poli-tick-in with Tom, and I'll have our own handle, and I'll put that link up on Facebook. So you can go there and see all of these videos. So sorry this one was a little lengthy, but I needed to give you a historical perspective of where this is all going, and I'm going to do each year that I can where we have some buttons and stuff to share. Thanks for paying attention. Happy Easter. God bless.